the healing that happens when you are in a safe place where you can share a little bit about who you are is enormous and very much lacking. You don't get that from a like on your Facebook post. It is thrilling to see people transformed by the love of a community. That's what we talk about. It's just the love of a community, and there's no agenda apart from you just coming and being yourself. And those kind of spaces, I think, transform people in so that they become more welcoming. I've seen a whole multitude of different types of people, and they're all beautiful. And that's a muscle we need to start practicing because the forces that are telling the other story are telling us a story of othering all the time, and that we will be safe if those other people aren't there. But it's not the truth.
Inez Aponte, welcome to the Accidental Gods podcast. How are you and where are you on this bright, shiny, we're in December, how did that happen? December morning.
Well, I am in Devon and the sun is streaming into my room at the moment. It's absolutely wonderful. I'm very well. I'm excited to be talking to you, Amanda.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we've talked quite a lot, you and I still have Devon envy. I still
Yes.
I still think Devon is an amazing and wonderful place to be.
It
So for
is.
people
It
outside the
is.
UK, it's way down south. It's
Mm,
near enough the coast, but it's also got Dartmoor, and it's just that beautiful
mm.
mix of moorland and sea and some very switched on people.
Yeah.
So, yay for Devon.
Yeah.
So, you are a storyteller and a barefoot economist, which I just think is a gorgeous idea. So, I know you share this a lot, but tell us how that came to be, how economics as a concept came to be something that you realized was important, because it took some of the rest of us a very much longer time to get to
Yeah.
that.
Yes. So, 20 years ago, at that point, I was already a storyteller for 10 years. I had my son, and some friends invited me over to their house to watch a film called An Inconvenient Truth, which is probably the biggest, at the time, the biggest mainstream climate change film. So I went along with my little baby, and we were watching all of this stuff about climate change. And there was a moment, I don't know if you remember this moment, where he has to get on a lift to show the temperatures rising, the hockey stick graph. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm looking at the temperature in like 2020, 2030, 2040. I'm thinking, that's my son's future. And I describe it as it was as if the future was disintegrating before my eyes. And even as I speak about it now, I can still feel the emotion. And I fell into, I guess, the sort of like deep, dark night of despair. And I sometimes tell people that I spent a week crying. And I don't think I exaggerate. I would lie there looking at my baby sleeping and just think, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And eventually I picked myself up and I got involved. The most positive thing I could find was joining the transition movement. At the time, I was living in Bristol. Um, but there was a kind of question that kept lingering with me after that moment. And that was about the other people in the room who were with me. And they were my friends, so I knew they were good people. But I was kind of fascinated by why they weren't acting like as panicked as I were, why they're like changing their lives around. And I realized then that actually we all respond differently to information. And also that even when we're confronted with the truth, if there is a story that can somehow make us feel better about what's going on, we will listen to that story. The story is kind of comforting and it helps us make sense of things. And I thought, what could be this story that is keeping everyone so passive about this? And I realized it was the story of economics. The story of economics keeps telling us that whatever is going on, somehow economics will fix it. We just have to keep growing the economy. And then when we grow the economy, we'll find all this technology and we'll be able to fix it. And I just was like, oh my God, that's what's going on. These are not bad people, but they are in the grip of a story. So yeah, that's kind of, I ended up then just by chance meeting someone who was studying at Schumacher College, which is now just down the road from me. And he had met a Chilean economist called Manfred Max Neef, who is one of the founders of Barefoot Economics, or human scale development. And that is how I ended up finding the kind of thing that really made sense of what was going on for me, this Barefoot Economics framework. Yeah.
Okay, and let's dive into that.
Mm,
But I just want to pause for a moment and reflect on the fact that that was nearly 20 years ago. Your son is 20 now and is off at
yeah.
college. And in those 20 years, we still haven't learned the lessons that should have been learned when that film first came out, which is exactly what you're saying. It hit some people really hard, and
Hmm.
some people it wasn't able to land. It feels to me it's what we're doing is throwing bits of Velcro at a lino floor. They don't stick because there's nothing to grip onto. Because unless there is the capacity for reception, people can't. And I think this is one of the things we're at that point where we are letting a narrative perpetuate, which makes people at a very core level feel ashamed of being human.
Hmm.
Where we're being told that we're both personally and collectively completely responsible for all of the chaos that we can see happening.
Hmm.
And at the same time, we are completely powerless to do anything about it. And if you're caught in that kind of double bind, you're like a rabbit in the headlights. The only rational and possible response is to freeze. And freeze
Yeah.
happens in different ways for people. There's denial of it's not happening anyway, or there's deflection of it's all happening in China, it's not actually our fault. Or there's despair. They crash into
Hmm.
a week of weeping, which I didn't hit them, but I hit it when I read Jim Bendel's Deep Adaptation. I
Mm,
cried for at least a week. And then there's
yeah.
also, I think, there's the defaulting to or displacing, I think, more to actions that let us feel a little bit as if something is being done that actually
Mm,
make no impact whatsoever because we haven't got the scope to
yeah.
imagine the scale of change that we actually would need to have. Because we're being told there is no alternative. Margaret Thatcher said that in
Yes.
1979, and everybody still believes it. So,
Hmm.
except you don't, and Manfred Max Neef didn't, and the people that you teach
Yeah.
with your Barefoot Economics course don't. So, let's have a look
Mm,
at how Max Neef frames what an economy is for. Because our economy is
yeah.
for making a profit, regardless of the impact on people and planet.
Mm.
What would a generative economy be for?
Yes. So the basic foundational principle behind human scale development is that the economy is to meet our fundamental needs and that those needs are finite. They're not endless. We don't have endless needs. We have endless wants, but we have, in this framework, 9 fundamental needs. And I think the most important thing that they did, because it was not just Manfred Max Neef, was a group of academics, was to distinguish between a need and a satisfier. So you have these 9 needs. You can have endless satisfiers, and those satisfiers are very much culturally determined. They're shaped by the story of your culture and by what's made available to you. So what that means is that there are endless possibilities for satisfiers, but some of them are in this particular economy aren't made available to us, or they're made very difficult to access, whereas some are made very easy to access. And mostly the ones that are easy to access are the ones that we can pay for, that someone can make a profit out of. So it might be good just to kind of go over what those needs are to get an idea of what they were thinking about. So I guess the most obvious one is subsistence. You need to keep your body alive. But another fundamental need, which is considered to be part of the economy, in the sense of the economy is about meeting needs, and this is fundamental, so is affection. We all need to feel loved and appreciated. And often when I bring that into the workshop, people are like, affection? How is that an economic need? But if you think of it like, how do we flourish? We flourish also through love. It's very, very important. So things like that, those social needs are part of this framework. So affection is a need. We have a need for freedom, autonomy, some agency in our lives. We have a need for identity. We need to know who we are and where we belong. Um, we have a need to also be idle. So there's a need for idleness. to
Yeah, I
rest
think
and
that's a terribly
relax.
unfortunate word. I think if we called it rest and relaxation, people would get less triggered by it because idleness is,
Yes.
in our language,
Yeah,
equates to being lazy, and lazy is bad because
exactly.
Protestant work ethic. Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry, carry on.
But also, that's where the conditioning comes into. So those needs
Totally.
are
Yeah.
conditioned by the culture. So when I work internationally, when I work with Brazilians or people from Latin America, they're like, idleness, yes,
Oh, really? Oh,
And
that's
I work
interesting.
with
Right.
Germans, they're like, idleness, no. It's very culturally sort of like dependent. So it's very much a kind
Right.
of Northern European thing about
Interesting.
idleness, but it's
Right.
not the same everywhere. So we have identity, idleness, freedom, affection, participation. We
Yeah.
need to join in with others and have a say about our lives. We have a need for protection. We want to feel safe and
Right.
secure.
Right.
We have a need for creation. We have an innate ability to express ourselves, a need to express who we are and experiment. We have a need for understanding to be able to make sense of the world. And I think that's it. That's
Yeah,
nine.
that's the nine.
Yes,
Yes.
that's the nine.
Okay, so I
So,
would really like to unpick these, but before we do, you were talking about needs versus satisfiers.
yes, yeah.
And let's, so is a satisfier, so I'm looking at this in a cognitive neuroscience sense, and everything that you've listed in those nine that Max Neef and the others listed are things that evoke serotonin
Mm,
in our brains. And we have this, if we get them, we create a serotonin mesh of
mm,
engagement and belonging,
mm,
that sense of being in
mm.
belonging. I'm part of a community where I am safe, where I
Yeah.
am fed, where I have and where I give and receive love and affection. Pride isn't in there in the list, but I think in terms of serotonin triggers, it's a huge one of I know what's
Mm,
mine to do and I'm doing it as well as I
mm,
can, and I'm surrounded by people who recognize that in me just as I recognize that in them. And the capacity to relax because we can only be creative when we're in that expansive space. And I
absolutely.
discovered the other day, interestingly enough, or interesting to me, that things like ayahuasca and psilocybin triggers serotonin release. And I
Mm,
suspect, though I have not yet found the evidence, but I'm sure it's there, that if you are in a culture where your serotonin mesh is healthy and
mm,
fed and
mm,
alive and springy, and then you bring in something like ayahuasca, the experience is very, very different
mm-hmm,
than if you're in a Western culture where we are giving ourselves little dopamine drips in a desperate effort to fill the hole inside. And the void inside is not filled by dopamine, it needs the
mm-hmm,
serotonin.
mm-hmm,
And so I am, and so if you have that serotonin void, and then you take ayahuasca or psilocybin, I think it's going to be a very different experience. That's a whole separate concept and a whole separate
yeah.
conversation. But I wonder, are they satisfiers? Are they external, extrinsic, motivational, money, a Rolex, a private jet things? Or are they also a cruise to the Caribbean, which for some cultures is a good thing, and for some cultures
Mm,
is a why would you want to do that thing?
yeah. So this is where we get to the really juicy bit of human scale development. So if we just start from the position that all over the world, these needs are the same, then we can start to see that in different parts of the world, people are attempting to meet those needs in a different way. And across time, they've been attempted to meet. So, for example, let's take the need for identity. If I was perhaps living in a small tribe in Papua New Guinea, my need for identity would be tied up with probably certain traditions, maybe certain material things, certain activities. But I don't live in Papua New Guinea, and my sense of identity is probably much more connected to consumerism. And that is because there is a 1.17 trillion industry that keeps telling me that I will belong and feel better about myself if I have these things. So it's not so much that the need itself, that motivation, that desire to meet the need is wrong. It's what is happening on the other side, the side of the satisfier. And it's very clear that certain satisfiers not only either don't even satisfy us, but they harm the world. And at the basic principle of human scale development is to find satisfiers that meet your need without harming others and without harming the planet. So that is the puzzle that you're trying to solve. And the reason why you distinguish between needs and satisfiers is you can then evaluate the satisfier rather than the need. So you never say to someone, oh, there's something wrong with having a need for identity. You say, oh, how are you meeting that need for identity? And is it actually meeting your need? Because a lot of the times it's not meeting the need. So there's also the thing about the Barefoot Economics framework is that it gives you language to describe what's going on. So there's a really important word in Barefoot Economics, which is pseudo satisfier. It's trying to meet your need. It's pretending to meet your need, but it never does it.
So can you
So
give us an example? Is alcohol a pseudo satisfier then?
it depends. I guess it depends on
Right,
how you're using it.
right.
So again, when I work with people, I never say alcohol is a pseudo satisfier. I just ask them, what do you think is a pseudo satisfier in your life? And then some people might say, well, actually, alcohol is because I'm drinking because I feel lonely, and what I really want is to be with other people. But for some people, alcohol might be like, oh, no, alcohol isn't because it's part of how I celebrate with other people. So you start to see that within even these satisfiers, there can be different ways in which we use them. And it creates a lot of space for those subtleties and those personal inquiries. And what I really love about it is that I sometimes work with quite young people, 12-year-olds, 17-year-olds. And often they get the idea of a pseudo satisfier very, very quickly. They're like, yep, they can reel them off. And I remember one young man of about 17 or 18 saying, my Xbox is a pseudo satisfier. And I said, oh, just tell me a little bit more. He says, well, it's a pseudo satisfier for affection and participation because I really just want to hang out with my friends in person, but the only option I have is to be on the Xbox with them. And you just think, wow, they came to that themselves. I wasn't hammering on about Xboxes being wrong. I just said, think about your needs, think about how you'd like them satisfied, and is what you're doing now actually satisfying them? And then what you see is that for a lot of people, we're not getting satisfied by this particular economic system that we've developed. We have a lot of poverties, and it allows you to see those. They just become much more focused.
Right. And it's the epidemic of those poverties is leading us to an epidemic of mental health chaos, I
Hmm.
would think, but also to the cultural state of the moment. Particularly, I'm really interested, all of them, I think they're all interesting, but identity is being weaponized
Hmm.
much more now than it was when we first saw Al Gore's film, for instance. It wasn't that we didn't have a sense of nation states in a Hobbesian sense and a sense of belonging to those nation states. It just hadn't been given the edge. Nobody was putting up
Mm.
England flags all around the place
Yeah.
20 years ago,
Yeah.
and the people who didn't put them up didn't feel threatened seeing
Hmm.
a flag of St. George. And now it's become something very deeply limbic. And I wonder,
Hmm.
I work quite a lot in a space where we're exploring Primavera de Filippi's idea of coordinations, um, which is in itself a response to the Banerjee's concept of a network state. But it's what happens if we let go of the Hobbesian concept of a nation as being that political entity which, within geographic boundaries, claims a monopoly on the legal use of violence. And it's an
Hmm.
inherently, a state is an inherently hierarchical, violent,
Yeah.
imposed thing. And yet, I see myself as Scottish. It's who I am. It's an integral part of my
Mm.
identity. And
Mm.
and I wonder whether within the barefoot economic space people are exploring ways that we could move from I am Scottish, or I am identity of nation state, or I am skin color, or I am gender, or I am whatever that gives me that sense of identity, all of which are relatively recent constructs, and none of
Mhm.
which is particularly relevant to the flourishing of human life or indeed all life on the planet. How do we shift?
Mm.
How would we? Or is there any work being done on how we might shift senses of
Uh,
identity?
yeah, I think the identity one, it often, another one that really triggers people because sometimes people then misunderstand it for like, oh, well, having a sense of identity is something that we should be moving away from. But
Hmm.
what Barefoot Economics acknowledges is that everyone has it. maybe apart from some very enlightened monks, everyone has a sense of themselves, of who they are and what they prefer. And that's okay. And I think that acknowledging that it's okay to have that, and even like, for example, sometimes part of our identity is to, dress a certain way.
Hmm.
And if there's a kind of slightly anti-consumerist approach, that it could be like, oh, you shouldn't care about what you look like. But humans have always cared about what they look like. It's okay. It's what you do on the satisfier end. Are you constantly buying new clothes?
Right.
Or, you could have, I saw this beautiful thing once where um, I think it was something from a tribe in a Native American tribe where the bridal gown was created over like 20 years. So this item
Oh,
that was going to be
right.
very important was just woven over 20
Right.
years. It was sort of like, and I
From
was just
when the
thinking,
little girl was born, then
yes.
it would be,
And
oh,
I
magic.
thought, okay, that's also identity. That's
Yeah.
also identity. It's just going to have a very different
And
impact on
it's
the planet.
affection and it's
Yes, it's
protection. It's
exact, and
so
it's
many
all
of
those
those. And
things
it's
wrapped up.
understanding of this is who
Yes,
you are as a human being.
yeah,
Let's look
yeah.
in at understanding because that also, sense making is
Mm,
one of the things that seems to be breaking down very fast in our culture. But I think if we look at it at, say, my parents' generation, our parents' generation, their sense making was very rigidly defined. They had maybe one channel on the television by the time they got had televisions, and they had two or three newspapers, and pretty much they were all saying the same thing. And
mm,
their capacity to make sense was very rigidly defined unless they really made an effort to break out of really quite
yeah.
narrow channels. And our capacity to make sense now is probably not quite infinite, but it's very close. And
Mm,
yet we have AI that can generate newspaper articles and videos and references that don't have any bearing on any actual reality.
mhm,
And and understanding seems to me to be a dual-sided thing. It's both how do I understand the world, and also do I have a sense of being seen, feeling felt, and getting gotten in
yeah.
Sarah Slaughter's concepts. Am I
Mm,
being understood?
mhm,
And so, again, I'm curious to know what's happening in the barefoot world in terms of helping people to be seen as in an
mhm,
authentic way, because it feels to me that authenticity is one of the most precious things in our world at the moment.
mhm.
And how do I recognize what's authentic in the world out there? Is that something
Yeah.
that's being explored?
Um, I, I don't know if it's being explored in the Barefoot Economics world per se. I guess the take on that might be that you would think of whether the satisfiers, let's say, if we think of the internet as a satisfier for the need for understanding, you have to ask, well, how well is it meeting that need? And in some instances, it might be. But in
Mm,
other instances, it might be doing the opposite. We might be
mm,
getting a poverty of understanding. And when I think, for example, of my grandmother was a Creole woman from Suriname. And so she lived off the land and raised 10 children off the land. And I think her understanding of living on the planet was far exceeds mine,
yes.
far exceeds it. Okay, I might know what's happening in China, but like I
Raising
would
10
love to have
kids from the
had,
land? Wow.
yes,
That's
I would
hardcore.
love to have had that kind of understanding. So again, it's like we can really go into the nitty gritty of it. What is that understanding? And when you're trying to evaluate this satisfier, you can also look at other aspects of what is available to us. So um, you could say the internet exists, we have access to information, but we don't necessarily have access, much agency over how the internet is run. So our sense of freedom and participation would be very low in that case.
Right.
Whereas the understanding that my grandmother would have had, she would have had more agency around the understanding that she was accessing because it was very direct. It was accessing uh, information from the community and from the land itself. So again, there's multiple layers
Mm,
that you can use in human scale development to make an assessment of how good something is for us, which is how it also distinguishes itself from very narrow measures of success. So, for example, the parts per million conversation, we can go into we need to reduce parts per million. And the consequence of that is that we get a lot of false solutions. And my
Yes.
my kind of big bugbear is the electric car, because the electric car, and I'll give you an example from Barefoot Economics, if you look at it through that lens. So in Barefoot Economics, you'd have to ask yourself, what is the car for? What are you trying to do with the
What
car? How
is
are you
the
meeting
need
needs?
that you're satisfying? Yeah.
Exactly. So even if you were able to make that car out of waste plastic or waste iron or whatever, and even if you used sludge to run it and it produced fresh air, just imagine, totally perfect, zero emission, a zero emission car. Okay. Look at what cars actually do to our society. Apart from that, they have to have infrastructure that runs through neighborhoods. People cannot play outside and meet their neighbors in the street anymore. They create an unsafe environment. And regardless of that car, you'll be commuting back and forth in a traffic jam. So your capacity for having time to meet your other needs will have diminished. The safety of your neighborhood has gone down. So you're not looking at it holistically, you're looking at it through one measure. And that one measure, I feel, in the last 20 years, has done enormous damage to our progress, because you can't look at it just through one measure. Because also you're having to look at where are the elements of creating an electrified grid coming from, and they're coming from the global south, and we know what's happening there. And so again, you have to look at this whole thing from a holistic nine needs perspective without damaging the earth. And the good news is that for most of our existence on the planet, we've managed it. It's not like we haven't managed to meet these needs. We've just met them in very different ways from the ways that we meet them now. So it's not impossible.
But it's very unlikely that we'll go backwards, I think. I agree with you. First of all, two things that I would like to branch and meet both. One is, for me, the sense of connection to the more than human world is also a human need that we have lost in our culture that isn't in that list. And I wonder if that was a deliberate, I wonder if they knew that and decided to cut it off. So that's question one. However, no, let's talk about that one, because then I want to go back to cars as an example of polycrisis and how barefoot economics might move us towards something that looks at the whole picture. But connection to the more than human world, in everything that I've understood in terms of initiation culture versus trauma culture, and what it is to be an indigenous human on the earth, where indigenous is connected, fully connected, not everyone's indigenous to somewhere, but where we mean someone who is co-creating with the web of life, then it's that co-creation with the web of life is an essential need. That if people are cut off from that, they die. And it is it there in one of the nine fundamental needs, and I'm simply not reading it into one of the words, or was it a decision to not appear spiritual in a Western world that doesn't like spirituality?
No, I think that it's implicit in the sense that you are trying not to do any harm to the world. But I have in my workshops made it explicit. So I often ask at the end of the nine needs, what is our most fundamental need? And it's interesting that very few people then say, oh, the earth. They don't, because we're very human centric. And then I say, oh, and they go, oh, yeah, of course. They say, yes, of course. But we do need to make that explicit. However, one of the strengths of the Barefoot Economics framework is that it is working with how humans in the West are today. I think it's very useful to start with what human needs are, because people have criticized it and said, oh, yeah, but it's not talking about the earth. But the fact is, most of us aren't talking about the earth. But we can get there by starting with talking about what human needs are and whether people's needs are met. So it's been my kind of like journey to talk to people who have no interest in the earth and no interest in economics, and somehow get them to be interested in economics and interested in the earth. Because once you start talking about the needs, all your satisfiers come from the earth. Your mobile phone wouldn't be here without the earth. None of the things you love can exist without the earth, but you are in a world that doesn't allow you to see that because it doesn't want you to see that. It wants you just to keep shopping. So therefore, there is a moment when you suddenly realize, oh yeah, if we destroy the planet, I won't get my needs met.
There are no mobile phones on a dead
It's
planet.
exactly, you
Yeah,
cannot have your needs met without the planet. Whereas we have
right.
the narrative we have now is, oh, you can get your needs met without the planet.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
oh, can we afford to save the planet? Literally, this is what
Oh
economics is
no,
doing right
don't
now.
tell me.
Can we afford to save the planet? I mean, you couldn't make it up. It's
Yeah,
so insane.
yeah,
But when you work with Barefoot Economics, you work from the needs back into understanding the earth is our foundation. But you don't expect people who are totally cut off from the natural world to suddenly get this connection. Because
right.
for most people, every day is just like, how am I going to put food on the table?
Sure.
So start
Yes.
with where they are.
Okay. And given what you just said, that most people's concerns are surviving within the death cult of predatory capitalism, which is
Yeah.
doing its best to grind people into the ground. And Rob Hopkins says capitalism is a disimagination machine. It's not an accident that we're all kept afraid of lack, because
Mm,
that holds us in a very sympathetic nervous system frame, which means it's much harder to be creative. And as you said, creation is one of our fundamental needs. And if we don't get it met, then we'll displace into other things. So, part of what this podcast is about is it looking at throughtopian narratives.
mm,
How could we go from where we are, which is clearly not grand, to a place of human flourishing within the web of life in a way that is co-creative. And as you've said, we have to start where people are. Have you explored in any of your workshops or any of the work that you've done routes to taking our existing capital economy that is dependent on markets and consumerism and values profit above everything else through to a human scale development economy that functions presumably in a completely different way and with a completely different value set underpinning it? How do we make the
mm.
shift from one to the other?
Yeah. I can't say that I have a sort of direct sort of story. This is how we do it.
Darn.
Because I think there are many, yeah, wouldn't be great. All our problems solved.
Yeah.
Because, we live in a very sort of complex world and there are different things happening all the time. What I try and offer people is a way in which they can understand themselves as part of this system differently, and by doing that see the value that they have, because this system tends to value us according to how much we produce, and all the other wonderful things that we might do, they don't count. We're not even interested in, and we start that from a very young age. When we say to children, what are you going to be when you grow up? We mean, what are you going to produce in the economy? You can't say, oh, I want to be a clown. They'll all laugh, It's like, but we need clowns. We need clowns, we need dancers, musicians, we need all of those things. But it narrows down our options. So what I'm trying to do is open up those options for people in a number of ways. And that's that there are many different ways to satisfy your needs. And you can look through different cultures that are still at the moment satisfying those needs in ways that do not harm the earth. And you as a person have value when you look at those needs, whether or not you have a job. If you're someone's friend, you are in a Barefoot economy extremely vital, because you're meeting someone's need for identity and affection and participation. And because we've become so disempowered, we need to start feeling the power that we have. We need to start feeling the value that we have and direct our attention to where is value happening in my world already. We were thinking about the future, but right now, some of these beautiful things are happening. We're just not paying attention because the economy right now is drawing our attention to all the shiny stuff that's making lots of
Or the
money,
lack of shiny stuff. I mean,
or the
many
lack
people
of shiny
can't feed
stuff.
their
Yes.
kids now. So,
Yeah.
okay.
So,
So
yeah.
we draw our attention and people get that. So my question always with these things is people get it, they understand at a cognitive level, and perhaps they then value their mother more or care for their
Mm,
mother and value that caring more or
mm,
any other example of caring in a way that is a reciprocal process. I'm wondering how we get to a critical mass of people who understand that,
mm,
such that the economy no longer hinges on profit. I remember vividly and quite distressingly David Cameron suggesting that GDP was not actually a very good model or measure of productive efficiency and we should start looking at other things. And he was right. And I was
mm,
pretty horrified at having to agree with David Cameron on anything. But nobody listened to him. He
yeah.
was leader of the Conservative Party at that point. They were in power and still nobody listened. And that was
Mm,
2015, a decade ago.
yeah.
And we still, everybody still thinks GDP is useful when it completely isn't. And
Yeah.
Robert Kennedy, the sane Robert Kennedy, gave an astounding speech on
Hmm.
how GDP was an extremely bad measure of value, and
Hmm.
we're still doing it.
Yeah.
Have you any sense of a barefoot economic movement arising such that people's sense of what really matters is shifting the Overton window somewhere
Mm.
towards a more life affirming way of being?
Yeah. I mean, I do feel very fortunate that I see a lot of great things happening. There
Yay.
are, again, one of the things is that when you get people together, it's very easy to listen to the news and think, oh my goodness, what's happening out there? But of course, that's a wonderful way to keep us all very sort of like,
Yes.
stuck.
And the people who
When
make
you
the
start to
news
look
are the
around,
billionaires.
yeah. And when you start to look around, you start to see, well, there are amazing things happening. But I think there is also something there about understanding where the obstacles are to all of our dreams. And
Okay.
one of the things that I introduce in my workshop is for people to understand that we have one money system when we could have a multitude of exchanges. And already, when you have a multitude of exchanges, it's much more robust because if one system fails, you have these other forms of exchange. And it's been sort of like knocked out of people's imagination that you can exchange with each other in many different ways.
Hmm.
So for people to understand, and then the work that I think is really important is the work of Bernard Lietaer.
Yes.
Um, you must be familiar with his work. Because he showed all the different ways in which
Yes.
people might exchange, and what that creates is this sort of like ecosystem of exchange. And that's not the same as money. All these different things have different qualities. They might be tied to different activities. So, like, he's very keen on sort of learning tokens. And
Hmm.
one beautiful project which he describes, which unfortunately the Brazilian government didn't take up, was where he proposed that children would start a kind of mentoring quite young. They would mentor children younger than them in school. And by doing that, alleviate some of the pressure on the teachers, but also they would gain in their own self-esteem. But by the time they got 18, they would also receive, I think, something like half of their further education would be paid for. And that's kind of saying, oh yeah,
Yeah.
again, a child has its own value they can give into the world. It doesn't have to be
Yes.
paid for because paying for that
Yes.
creates another quality, but it can be valued so that ultimately, with what they offer to their community and to their peers, they can end up getting an education. So you're taking it away from the conventional money system, but you're still offering value and credit. I mean, credit is what you're looking for. You give something and you get something back at some point, even if it's not immediately, and you're giving into your community. So understanding these different forms of exchange. And another one I really, really love is do you know grassroots economics, Will Ruddick?
No, I should,
Oh, you
obviously.
must have him on your podcast.
Right.
Absolutely wonderful project happening in Kenya. And over there, he's basically working with the community to revive a very ancient form of exchange called Mawaria. And it's a form of commitment pooling that means that communities come together and they say what they're going to put into the pool. And when you put something in the pool, it means at some point you can take out of that pool. And you also decide as a community is what is of value. So
Right.
it's not just only practical things. It could be a grandmother and some of her wisdom can also go into the pool. And then you create these exchanges with each other that bind you together as a community.
Mm.
It's not foolproof. Sometimes people don't make good on their promises. But, right now, lots of ways people are not making
People
good on
don't
their
make good on their
promises.
promises. Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's kind of, part of and parcel of working with people, but you
yes.
create, then the exchange becomes something that like binds you together as a community. It's so wonderful. Absolutely, you must get in touch with him. But there are
I will,
many, many
yeah.
ways that people can exchange. And that awareness of people to realize that again opens up possibilities. I don't have to only meet my
Yes.
needs in one way.
Right, right.
So
And it doesn't have to be within the existing hierarchical economy.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, I will put a link to Bernard's work and I will find grassroots economics and put a link to that too. Okay, so let's come back to barefoot economics as a model for a different way of being. And it sees the economy as that an economy can be a good thing. There's, because we live in a predatory economy, it's not the case that all economics has to be predatory. It can be a flow of value. And that what we value at a heart level can be a good thing. I think I worry sometimes when we're looking at some of Bernard's work that everything can become zero sum, or everything can become price and value led again. Now a child has value and that value can be extracted. We exist in an economy where the economy is fundamentally predicated on the commodification of suffering. And at every human suffering, planetary suffering, ecosystem suffering, everything, that's we extract value by imposing suffering. And I'm really interested in how we can frame economics as a way of exchanging, accounting for, and storing value in a way that is flourishing for the human heart and the connection to the more than human world. And it seems to me that barefoot economics frames an economy that is not predicated on the commodification of suffering. This is a good thing. Sorry, guys, there's a cat waving its tail at my microphone. Um, and I wonder, this may not be possible, but whether you or anyone in the barefoot economic world has explored how the world would look and feel if our entire system were predicated on human scale development instead of the commodification and extraction of suffering. How would we wake up in the world? What would the world feel like? How would we exchange, store, and account for value? Does that make sense as a question?
Yes. Yeah. So I guess the thing about human scale development is that it's not prescriptive. So in different communities, probably there would be different ways in which those needs would be satisfied. But at its foundation, I guess there's some foundational things is that you would be looking at relocalizing. Simply because when you relocalize, I guess there's two things happening, and we have to think about energy. So, like you're using less energy to meet your needs, which is incredibly important. But not only that, when you relocalize, you're also increasing your agency. It's much easier to have agency over something nearer to you than having agency over a much, much larger sort of like you get participation met and your freedom met. So you're always looking at trying to find where it basically Max Neef says, things should start from the village and then go on to the global order and not the other way around. Right now we have the global order determining what happens in the village. He says, no, it starts in the village and then it goes out into the global order. So you're not ignoring the fact that you live on a planet and that there's connection, but you're saying, how does this work for these people right here in this particular place? So you're very much focused on the particulars of the place that you're in. Whereas right now we have a situation in which we barely connect to the places we're in because so much of our satisfiers are just coming in from all over the place. And so the focus is like the meeting of needs within a place. And whether we like it or not, we are going to be forced into that situation probably sooner than we like. Because, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with Nate Hagen's work around energy blindness.
Yeah,
And,
yeah. And the great
it's just the
simplification.
inevitable, the great simplification. We
Yes.
have to simplify. But that does not mean necessarily that that's a bad thing. Simplifying our
It
lives does
doesn't. But
not
if we
have
do
to
it
be a bad
because we
thing.
have to rather than because we want to, there's going to be a lot of
Yes.
resistance. So
Yeah.
the electric cars is a thing. If we told everybody you can't have a car, there would probably be an armed revolution, much faster than if you told everybody, I'm sorry, we're going to pollute all of your water with 16,000 forever chemicals that are guaranteed to be both carcinogenic and endocrine disruptors, and everyone goes, yeah, fine, that's as long as we've got the Teflon pans, we don't care. But you'd say, no, you can't have a car, and there you are, there's pitchforks in the streets. And actually, I live in the middle of nowhere and there's no other way of moving around. I do need some way, unless all I do is walk and cycle. So, how do we shift to a space where whatever is coming down the line, we meet it with generosity of spirit and integrity and compassion and whatever you think are the foundational values that would get us through in a way that goes, yes, actually, I want to live this simpler life. And I want there to be air that I can breathe and water I can drink and soil that actually generates food that's worth eating and that I can eat, even though raising 10 kids on the land is beyond my current skill set. So how do we help create the narratives that mean that it's not like just slamming straight into a brick wall? Because at the moment, if we hit the great simplification tomorrow, a lot of people are going to be very, very, very unhappy. And it won't be uh, tomorrow there is no power. It's unlikely to be that. There's going to be a ramping down. And the people who weaponize identity are going to use that ramping down as a weaponization. And I would really like us to be in a space where everybody goes, you know what, this is much nicer. I don't have to go to work anymore. Because work is a product of predatory capitalism. They need us to be locked in a system where we are producing. And guess what? That no human being evolved with work. It was not a thing. So we don't need more jobs. We need to find a world where there are no jobs. There's what is your vocation? What is it that you choose to give in a far simpler world? But that as a narrative is much harder. And I'm wondering if within human scale development, there are ways of helping people move to that place of grace and yearning for that world.
So I think that we can, in some ways, learn from predatory capitalism, because, of course, the advertising industry, they are always looking at what's their pain point, what's their pain point. And if you look at what's happening through the lens of Barefoot Economics, you can see that there are a lot of poverties that we're suffering from right now in the kind of wealthy part of the world. Poverties of affection, poverties of identity, of participation. And what you see capitalism doing is they prey on that. So they go, oh, like, I mean, this is a while ago, but we have the Coca-Cola family. I mean, for goodness sake, what is that all about? But, they were like, oh, yeah, people need connection. We make them part of the Coca-Cola family. And I think those of us who want a better world, we need to start thinking about what people's needs are and tell stories about those needs. What would it be to be part of a family that's, regenerative is a tricky word, but a more connected family. I think it's just one of those words. If I talk to my family about regeneration, they're like, what do you mean? It's not a kind of common word. We have to think about using language that people can just really relate to. But if
Oh,
we
I
start
live
to
in
think
such a
about,
bubble.
yeah,
Regenerative is
I know
a word
everyone's
in my
regenerate,
bubble.
but no,
Okay.
really, regeneration is not this regenerative. I mean, it's not hard to understand, but it's not sort of common, a common word in the rest of the world. But if we were to think about that, like, for example, the kind of pandemic of isolation and loneliness, drop the agenda and bring people together. They want that. They want to be together. They don't know how to be together. They've unlearned how to be together. There's too much time on screens, but people are yearning for connection. So already that could just be part of your plan. I always say, we need to become the better friend. We need to become the better friend because there's some really nasty friends trying to get hold of everyone's, desires right now. And we could be that better friend. We could be that place where people feel that they're accepted, that they can be creative. Is that an agreement?
Yes.
Yeah, so creating spaces where people's needs are met, because if people's needs are not met, they will accept any way of meeting their needs, even if it destroys them and the planet. If they cannot get their needs met, all of us, none of us are immune to that. If the only food I can find is ultra processed food that's been transported around the world, I will eat it because
No,
I'm
it's also
hungry.
addictive. So even if there's
Yeah,
eggs and apples next to it, I'll still go for the donuts. So
yeah. And so if you think of being able to provide the satisfiers that are really going to meet people's needs, and also moving away from the addictive satisfiers, people people want real satisfaction. It's not that hard. Once you get people in a space, I find it's not that hard to see how desperate they are for connection and meaningful, purposeful activity. It does mean getting them away from their screens, but I think it also means starting with meeting needs before you go on to telling people about your agenda. And in fact, that is the playbook of, I can't remember whether it was, what was that group? There was a sort of right-wing group during COVID that was going around helping the old people, all of that stuff. And I thought, you are clever. You are clever because you know what? People will like you and then they will want to listen to you and then they're going to join your group. I remember seeing, it wasn't even a terribly good film, but it was about the Ku Klux Klan. And there was a moment in the film where this undercover agent is at a barbecue and she's asking this person who's there, oh, how do you feel about being here? Why are you part of this group? And he says, this is my community. And I think he needed community more than he needed to hate Black people. So, we have to, there are clearly people who have, negative intention, and then most people are floating around trying to find something meaningful in their lives, and we need to provide that meaningful space for them. And I think that's the sort of place where we can start, and it's a space beyond politics. I think not
yeah,
that
there are
politics
no
isn't
politics on a dead
important.
planet. I am having that conversation with quite a lot of people after the Europe Party debacle at the
Oh my
weekend of
goodness.
let's not go down that road. And for people
Yeah,
outside the UK, that will mean nothing. So,
yeah.
however, it seems to me, I don't know what timescales you're working on, but we haven't got very long in which to do this. And building community requires a nexus of people who understand that it's useful and know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then people who are willing to step away from their screens and join. Oscar Wilde said a very long time ago the problem with socialism, it takes up too many evenings. And he didn't have screens to distract him. He just didn't want to be going out into the cold and the wet and the dark every other evening
Mm.
to get together with the local people and try and form a better system. So how do you work towards this in your communities?
Um, so I think it's a really good point about the speed of things. And on that basis, I mean, the speed that we need to go at is unfathomable, right?
Yeah, and progress happens at the
Um,
speed of trust and all those things. I
yeah,
love
yeah,
that, but still, I am
but
thinking of the
still,
urgency.
yes, there is urgency, and at the same time, so I would say there's a few things. Of course, we need people who can create community. We need people who understand that. We also need space. If we don't have spaces in which to gather, if we don't have land, well, it's great, but every single movement I've talked to, they're all like, "Oh, we got together, we had a place." And they'd say like, "Oh, it really took off when we found this sort of like disused shop," because we are material beings. We need to be in a space. We need to be on the land. We need to have that connection to something very real. So, as part of this, listening and getting together and empathy and creating community, we have to also fight for our spaces. And so I'm very glad that there are a lot of places that are doing that. But I think it's very important if you're thinking, oh, what should I do? Join some kind of land-based movement, taking back, disused spaces, making sure people have housing, because we need to have space to be in. It's absolutely important. And then what happens in a space, I think it really accelerates the change. It really accelerates our capacity to do stuff. So I would say that that is an incredibly important part of that. And then, yeah, what you do in those spaces that, we make them
Tell us what you did in
democratic.
Plymouth, because that sounded really interesting.
Yes, so in Plymouth, I've been part of a project called Tales to Live By, and there we created living rooms with the goal of bringing people out of isolation. It was framed as a mental health project, but we were trying to make it more like a mental well-being project because the idea behind that was that rather than ghettoizing mental health, why don't we create spaces where the people who are struggling are with the people who are flourishing in a living room? And in that living room, you are invited to share something of yourself. And it doesn't matter what it is. You might be very good at doing a particular thing. It might also be something you're trying out, but you're invited to be seen by this loving community. And the feedback we've had from that has been absolutely like wonderful. The healing that happens when you are in a safe place where you can just share a little bit about who you are is enormous, and it's very much lacking. You don't get that from a like on your Facebook post. It is absolutely thrilling to see people transformed by the love of a community. That's what we talk about. It's just the love of a community, and there's no agenda apart from you just coming and being yourself. And those kind of spaces, I think, transform people in so that they become more welcoming. There's less othering. There's more like, oh, I've seen a whole multitude of different types of people, and they're all beautiful. And that's the muscle we need to start practicing because the forces that are kind of telling the other story are telling us a story of othering all the time, and that we will be safe if those other people aren't there. But it's not the truth. But we have to, rather than saying, oh, yeah, those immigrants are good people, spend some time with other people and experience their story and hear their story. And there is no way you can hear another person's story and not be moved. That is what happens when someone authentically shares who they are. We have a capacity for connecting with that. It's almost impossible not to connect with that. It's just, you'd have to make it a real effort not to
Yeah,
connect
but
with
I'm
another
really
human being
interested in how you
sharing.
create a safe enough space for that to happen, because I've been in spaces where sharing authentically was not a safe thing to do. And yet
Yeah.
the people holding it thought that's what they'd created, and they definitely had not succeeded. And I'm really curious to know in in what is the kind of space where there might well be triggers of gender or sexuality or identity or
Yeah.
race, how do you create that level of emotional literacy that allows it to be safe?
Yes. I mean, I'd have to unpick that a little bit. I've been doing it for a very long time.
Okay,
Um, I think there's something about really meaning it, and that's a practice also within yourself.
right,
You have to really mean it. When you say, I'm accepting, people as they are, you have to mean it. Even if you only mean it for the evening, you
right,
have to mean it for that evening.
right,
And you also have to set up really good boundaries
right.
because that safety is contingent on the boundaries that you set. So not everything is where violence isn't welcome, you
Okay.
know.
And
So not
emotional
everything
violence.
is
So if
welcome.
somebody is innately racist, sexist, and homophobic,
Yeah.
you have boundaries that don't let them then project their
Uh,
stuff out onto other people, or do you
yeah.
let them and
Yeah.
accept them for who they are?
No, because you're weighing up the safety of the whole group. You're
Right,
seeing yourself much more as a whole. And I think it's quite a very, I mean, in my entire career of 30 years of facilitating, it's only happened once or twice that people don't read the room, because
Okay.
the energy in the room is not just what I do,
Yeah,
it's what
it's
it's
the
sort of
collective.
contagious thing.
Yeah.
It's like we agree through our actions, how we speak, the tone of our voice, how we welcome people into the space. We're making agreements,
Mm.
how the space is laid out, what the light is like. They're all things that are there to help us regulate our nervous system. So it's not just me, it is everything, the whole
Yeah.
team. Everyone is there with a regulated nervous system. It's a place to relax. The sounds, we make sure that it's somewhere where you just feel safe.
Mm.
And then we also are explicit about that safety. Of course,
Right.
you need to name these things, but it's a
That's good.
yeah, it's
It's really
very hard to
interesting.
sort of
It's probably a whole other podcast because that sense of co-regulation and re-regulation and what it
mm,
is to present, to turn up authentically, which takes a
yeah,
lot of courage. But if one person, you, can do it, then it seems to me the energetic ripple of that around a
yeah.
circle. I apologize. There's a puppy running up and down around me. Um, Hello, lovely. Yes, it's good. In a minute. Um, there's something about that capacity, and it only takes a couple of people within a circle. And we are so attuned at a really deep level, I think, to listen to that. And part of what we've lost in the fragmentation of culture, where you're on a screen, you can do that on a screen. I've watched it happen in Zoom rooms, but it doesn't happen, for instance, in a television studio where there seems to be the opposite of that, and they want people to assault each other. And that too is something that we feel. And I think acknowledging our the magic that happens when we are subliminally aware of the energy of a space and respond to it. And I think that can be transformative. And I know that self-reliance is one of the three pillars. We didn't really talk about the three pillars because actualization of human needs is one, increasing self-reliance is another, and balancing interdependence between people, and I would say between all parts of ourselves, ourselves and each other, ourselves and the web of life, are where how we get forward and finding ways to let people experience that feels to me you're moving way beyond the cognitive level. Okay, Puppy is now eating very loudly. I'm so sorry. We're just going to have to go with that. Sorry, people. The crunching noise in the background. Okay, she's now just got to the point where she wants to steal things off my desk. You can have an apple core. How's that? Have an apple core. It's nice. You like apple cores? No, I don't. I want your pen. Um, we're going to have to stop in a minute, partly because the puppy is going to definitely not having my pen, need to go out. But maybe this is another podcast of how do we at scale help people to understand their their role in a community, that they have a role in a community, that community is a thing, and that they are an integral and essential part of that, so that they can have that sense of reciprocal pride. And I'm really curious, did the Plymouth Project, did you see it rippling out, I suppose? Quick answer, because I will have to go shortly.
I see it rippling out. I mean, I saw the impact of that it had on people. Um,
I'm listening.
yes, there has been. I mean, and people have said real transformation in their lives around their creativity because it's a creative project as well. People can come and try things out, and just in a sense of self-esteem and their sense of valuing themselves. And it's in some ways I have to say, it's not that simple because, like you said, there are things that we do that make that happen, but it's also not rocket science. And if we created these living rooms all over the country, we would be transforming the culture, because the culture is very much sort of focused on the individual right now, and it's not meeting people's needs.
We're going to have to stop because I'm not meeting my puppy's needs. I'm really sorry.
It's
I thought
very
I'd
important.
worn her out this morning, but clearly
Yeah.
not. All right,
Yeah.
and we're at the top of the hour. Okay, I
Yeah.
think that's a really good place to stop, though. Creating the spaces where we help people to meet each other's needs and
Yes.
giving
Yeah.
them the skills to do that feels to me
Mm.
really crucial to
Yeah.
getting towards the human scale development that we need.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there
Thank
anything
you so
else that
much.
you would like to share in a tiny amount of time at the end because she's gone off to eat other words somewhere.
No, I mean, I guess we'll just put the details of the websites in
I
the
absolutely will.
links,
Yes,
and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
it really has. I
Absolutely.
look forward to a barefoot economic world as soon as we can make it happen.
Me
Thank you
too.
so much, Inez Aponte, for
Thank
coming
you.
on to the Accidental Gods podcast.
Thank you.